So, first and foremost, the very first thing that I think everyone wants to know is where do you get your inspiration from?
Where do I get my ideas from? You
You
know,
can answer it if you want. I know that you get that question a million times during like every stream.
that's just it's a joke. Um,
Yeah, but yeah.
well, no, it's a you ask that question to someone and then they're like, uh, it's a funny question to ask people.
Yeah.
Um, but to answer it seriously, I don't. Um, a lot of it's through cultural osmosis, I guess, just kind
Sure.
of existing in the world and reading things and seeing things and going places,
Yeah,
watching movies and television and, you know,
for
being
sure.
a person.
That's the best advice I ever got. Was like the best thing you can do for your writing process is to just live your life.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
What do you do for TLG?
I don't know. I have no idea.
No
Whatever,
one has
whatever,
really been able to answer that
whatever,
question with like one thing.
whatever Steven needs me to do. Um, my official title is production assistant. I prefer to think of myself as chief whipping boy. Uh, I if something desperately needs to be done that nobody else wants to do,
Mm,
that's usually me. Um, it's a lot of like fine detail stuff
yeah,
in terms of editing or collating data. Um, I've done a ton of removing OGL content because we're still going through that
right.
and collating monsters. So um, at this point, I think I have the entire fourth printing Monsters and Treasures memorized, which is not something I would have ever wanted
Sure.
to be the truth, but it is now. And it's that. I do a little bit of layout. I do a little bit of making graphics for marketing and stuff for Endless Worlds. A little bit.
Sure.
I help Chuck with stuff with the cons. I write scenarios and whenever there's like, oh, there's a stretch goal thing that needs to be put out for a Kickstarter, I'm usually the one to do that. I did the Grim and Unexpected Guests, which was the Codex Sinarum adventure where they're like, oh my God, we need an adventure. I was like, I guess I can make one real quick. So I put that out, and then for Gary Con this year, I wrote the tournament scenario, which was Drums in the Dark. I've written a couple of other adventure modules that haven't seen the light of day. We'll see if they do. There's a big stack of them, so who
Sure.
knows?
That's so
All,
cool.
yeah, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of stuff.
Do you feel like so I don't know, like thinking about writing an adventure just in a couple of days, just getting it done. It needs to be done right now. It needs to be done
Yep.
yesterday. I don't know if I could do that.
But
Like, have you always been able to just like do stuff quickly?
no, no, never.
Sick.
Um, and I couldn't even do that. I had to take. I shouldn't even be saying this. I took an adventure that I'd already written
Mm.
that I had sold them before I worked for the company. They had bought the rights from me, and then when I came on as an employee, I was like, well, I'll just take this. You own it. You're not doing anything with it. And I just changed all the names of things and made it sufficiently Chinese themed, and
Sure.
it worked fine. So
That's awesome.
because I started writing something and it was getting really long in the tooth, and I was like, the amount of detail that this is going to require for it to be playable is not really worth it, and the the monsters and like the things I would have to like
Yeah.
create versus pulling from different sources, and it was a lot, and it wasn't going to work. Um, and then that's another thing that Steve's got me working on right now is he's like, oh, I don't like how our treasure tables work, right? Our random treasure generation tables. He's like, I don't like that we got to roll on like six different tables. I was like, well, okay, that's how they are. He's like, and then we were in a chat, and Davis was like, I wish it was all on one table. So he's like, that's a great idea, Jeremy, do that. And I was like, okay.
Sick.
Um,
Great.
so I've been spending that's all I've been doing for like the past 8 days.
Gee,
Trying to,
just putting it all on one table.
which you can't.
Hmm.
At first, they wanted them all in like stratified by level.
Yeah.
So like, okay, first through fourth level, this is your treasure table, up through 24th level, because that's where the game theoretically caps out. We don't have any levels beyond that are actually written. But I was like, oh, this has to require subtables for the bonus on your weapon, or the type of weapon, or the type of armor, or the tables are going to be insanely long because I have to list out every type of weapon and every type of armor on each of these tables. There's going to be a lot of duplication in that.
Yeah.
And the second you go from 4th to 5th level, all of a sudden your treasure gets way better, and you're not finding any +1 swords anymore. They just don't exist anymore. So now I have to start making repeats from the previous table.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that.
They just get exponentially longer. And I was like, this is not going to work. So then another thing I thought of was like, okay, I will take all of the probabilities from all of the tables as they currently exist and make them into one master table. And I was like, all right, I'll use a D1000. That probably covers it. We don't have 1,000 items. That should be good. No. Some of these items have less than 1 in 100,000 chance of dropping. So that doesn't work either. I have to have. I gotta talk to Steve about all this later. I don't know if any of this is gonna make it into the cut.
Sure.
Who knows? But that's the kind of stuff I do. And I'm not even a very good math guy. I'm very, very. My math skills are very, very poor. So.
That's awesome.
And I'm not even a stickler. So like, Steve and Chuck especially, not so much Davis and Jason, they see me as like this really like hard-ass rules guy. I'm really not.
Do they?
Yeah, they do.
I mean, I don't know you as well as they do,
No.
but I didn't get that sense.
Yeah, like I don't care about rules at all. When I'm running a game at the table, I don't crack open the rule book hardly at all.
Yeah.
But when I'm writing the game, I'm like, okay, if we have a rule that exists,
Consistency.
we should probably use it.
Hmm.
We should probably be consistent. Like, we don't need that. Like, well, like I try to think about how a rule that we introduce is going to affect the rest of the game, or the rest of the systems that we have in the game.
Right.
And I'm forced to think that way because very few other people who are designing for the game do. Jason and Davis do.
Yeah.
But Steven, who does a lot of design, doesn't think that way. And because I'm constantly checking his work, I now have this reputation of being this super analytical guy. He's like, oh, you're the numbers guy. I'm like, no, I'm not.
Please.
Really,
No.
like, here, do this for. I'm like, oh.
Jeez. I feel like a more apt title for you is like game engineer.
No, please.
Just numbers, math, all the science stuff.
See, I'd much rather just like write narrative stuff. Although, even that I like to be more hands off with. If I could have my way, I would just write a book of 7,000 adventure hooks with no payoff at all. I'd just be like, here's a bunch of ideas.
That'd be awesome.
That's all I feel I'm good at. Is like coming up with the starts of stories. I can't finish them worth a damn. And I'm no good at math, and I'm no good at storytelling. But I can come up with a good idea for a start. So.
I think a book like that would be awesome. Just like prompts, because sometimes like I can have the opposite problem, and I think a lot of people can, where it's like once the hook is there, then it's like okay, but getting started is like the hard thing.
Mm.
I know we've talked before a little bit on Twitch about like resources and to use them, because like everyone needs a little bit of help, I think, when it comes to like any sort of creative project, whether that's a book or a game or whatever.
Mm.
But I don't know, like, do you have stuff that you use to like help write things?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'll go back to things that other people have written. I'll look at the Castle Keeper's Guide or the Old Dungeon Master's Guide. Those are very helpful. And I'll also kind of there's a lot of books on like storytelling or mythology, or like
Yeah.
things like the monomyth and stuff like that I find really kind of helpful, because it kind of strips bare like key elements of storytelling or archetypes or whatever, and then
Sure.
uh, that kind of helps. And then just kind of popular media, as kind of hokey as that is to say, just
No, for sure.
most of my writing and most of my game design is, I saw something cool in a movie one time and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna build an elaborate house of cards around this one kernel of an idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Man, that was the other thing I was gonna ask you. Like, from what I can tell, your brain for like folklore and monsters and myths is like crazy.
yeah.
Has that always been like an interest?
Um, yes, it has. When I was a little boy, um, I don't know what back when there were scholastic book fairs, if you remember those.
Oh, I couldn't forget them.
Yeah,
That was the
exactly.
best day of my life as a kid.
I saw this big book that had monsters in it. It wasn't an RPG product at all, but it had these drawings of like monsters, and it was like, this is from this area of the world, and it's from this time period, and here's some facts about it. And it had like the Pegasus and the Manicore and the giant and an ogre and stuff like that. I was like, that's so cool. Like as a little boy, I was probably like 6 or 7. I was like, this is cool. I'm gonna make my own. And I decided I was gonna do that.
Yeah.
And so I took out a big stack of um, spiral bound notebooks and loose pieces of paper, and I would draw my own monsters, and I would write up crap about them, and I would put a little map. It was like, this lives here, and
Yeah.
it eats this, and I have no idea where those are now. I probably did
Sure.
120 of them. I did a lot of them, and then later on, I got my hands on a monster manual. I was like, oh, they
Yeah.
exist. This
It's
is
the
real.
thing.
This is what I've always wanted in my mind. Um, but weirdly, I didn't really get into like fantasy or anything until I was in, I think, high school.
Really?
I was really, really, really late to that party. I got a copy of The Hobbit my freshman year, and I read it. I was like, this is pretty great.
Man, that's so interesting. Like, was there anything that was like disconnecting the interest in like monsters from fantasy? Maybe that's like a weird question.
Um, no, I just thought monsters were like big monsters were cool.
Yeah.
That was
Just
as deep as it got.
isolated
Like,
from the whole,
yeah,
like the rest of it.
why does the little boy think giant robots are cool? It's because they are. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
The I I guess I just didn't have a real window into that world. I didn't have like an awareness of it, or like access to language to describe it.
Sure.
I I wasn't even aware of any of this stuff until probably, like my sister was into Harry Potter, but that was as much fantasy that got into my household at all. That was it.
Mm,
It was like Harry Potter and the Wizard of Oz. That was it.
sure.
And like my dad was into science fiction, and so I would count Star Wars as fantasy, and so Star Wars as well. But I wasn't a big reader at all,
Mm.
um, until I got into high school, and then I was like, oh, I read The Hobbit, and so I was like, this is amazing. I got the Lord of the Rings. I was like, this is amazing. And then I got into, in middle school through high school, and probably way after that, I was playing. My cat is yelling at me.
What's your cat's name?
Her name is Cleopatra.
Cleopatra. A little queen.
She's
Oh my goodness. I've discovered recently my love for orange cats.
Yeah, she's cute. She's a little simple, but
That's orange cats
um,
for you.
that's right. The All through middle school, and actually it started in elementary school. One big fantasy element in my life was this shitty JavaScript based MMORPG called RuneScape. It was very, very, very bad.
Oh, I'm
And
familiar.
I played the hell out of it. And that was the only form of fantasy I knew, and it was very silly, kind of sarcastic, um, and very basic. Like it just had humans. Like there wasn't, it was
Yeah.
very stripped back. And then I got fantasy books, and then through that I found out about role playing, and I discovered that Dungeons and Dragons existed and all of this, and then I found out
Mm.
about Appendix N, and then I read Robert E. Howard, and that stuff just like completely blew my mind open. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like a movie in your head, but it was like really violent, which I liked. Um, and then it was all over after that, and then I started scouring the world for anything from Appendix N I could find, because I'd already had realized I had read a good amount of it, not all of it, but
What is Appendix N?
Appendix N is in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition. I don't know where it is.
Sure.
In the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition, there's a huge collection of appendices
Mhm.
on random shit. Most of them are just about game stuff, like random encounter tables, poisons, stuff like that, like
Yeah.
practical game applications. But one of them, the appendix, because they're alphabetized, the appendix N is very different in that it is inspirational reading, and it is just a big bibliography of all of the things that Gary thought influenced the milieu of the game and the design and the philosophy of the game. And
Interesting. Cool.
yeah, it's probably 30 authors. Some of them have specific books. Some of them just list the name, and you got to figure out what, if anything, from there is.
Yeah.
And so, if you want to be complete about it, there's probably thousands and thousands and thousands of books, because you got to read their entire bibliography to be thorough.
Sure.
But I decided I was going to read as much of it as I could, and a lot of the weird quirks of RPG design kind of became laid bare after reading this stuff, like components. Like we have verbal, somatic, and material component. That's a weird, like if you think about it practically, that's a weird thing to arrive at just out of nothing.
Yeah.
Because you could just say, I make a spell, right? That would be probably easier for designing a game. But if you read The Complete Enchanter, specifically, I think it's the second one. I don't remember. I only remember the Roaring Trumpet, which is the best one. They get progressively worse as they go along.
Sick.
They're very fun stories. It's about this guy who gets transported into mythological and folklore worlds, and he realizes that he can perform magic there. And they specifically say in this book from like the 50s that the spells require material, verbal, and somatic components. And if you get them wrong, the spell can be wrong by factors. Like you could try to summon a dragon, but if you get it wrong, you could summon 100 dragons or 0.1 dragons, stuff like that. And it's just a teeny tiny dragon, like stuff like that.
Sure.
I was like, oh. And then you read Jack Vance's The Dying Earth, and they talk about how sorcerers have to memorize their spells, and they're etched into their mind, and when they cast them, the force at the release causes them to forget it. I was like, oh, these two things are just what spellcasting is. Like you just take these two novels and you stitch them together. That's why Dungeons and Dragons has, like, why most traditional TTRPGs, Castles and Crusades included, have this weird spellcasting mechanic.
Yeah.
It's from two specific novels. If you read Three Hearts, Three Lions, that's about a guy who gets whisked away to a fantasy land where he becomes a paladin. He has all of the abilities that a TTRPG paladin has. He even summons a lawful good horse. He gets a holy avenger.
That's
called
awesome.
a holy avenger. And he fights a troll that he cuts the limbs off of, and they keep fighting, and it grows back its limbs. That's where the troll comes from. That is where law and chaos and neutrality are from. That axis, which is expanded upon in the Michael Moorcock, all of his stuff, which is a huge can of worms, which I highly recommend. But
Sure.
that's massive echoes. That has more. That has a more direct impact on like Warhammer and stuff. But
Sure.
that's also in Appendix N. So it's all there. Like all
That's
these
so cool.
weird quirks of the game. Not all of them. Like there's nothing in there to explain why a monk is there. There's a lot of disagreement with the designers on why a monk is there. So
Sure.
um,
Did you read through, or I mean, is this ongoing? Like, are you still reading
I am
through
not done.
Appendix N?
I will
Sure.
probably never be done.
Did you start reading Appendix N before you created Swords and Chaos, your game?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
I had been very far. I had probably been 200 books in by the time I wrote Swords and Chaos, because I had already developed my taste for what in Gary's selections of works that I preferred. Some of the stuff he recommends, I do not care for at all.
Sure.
I would not recommend the Carnelian Cube to anyone.
The Carnelian Cube?
I would not recommend that to anyone. If you want to know where the cubic gate magic item comes from, it's Carnelian Cube.
I don't even know that item off the top.
It's a little cube that you interact with it, and it sends you to different worlds. And it's made of carnelian. And in the Carnelian Cube, this guy, he's an archaeologist, and he steals it from some guy that he's working with, and he puts it under his pillow, and he gets whisked away to all these different silly worlds. But it's so silly that it's like very taxing.
Sure. Yeah.
To the reader, and like every world he goes to, everyone is a simpleton. It's like when everyone's a simpleton, it's very, very, very taxing to read.
That would get old.
But by the time I was writing Swords and Chaos, I had a very, very strong idea for, okay, this is the stuff I like. I'm gonna highlight this stuff. And that was like Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian, Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné, and Coram Law, or whatever it is. I love the character. I can't pronounce his name. Jack Vance's The Dying Earth, and then a couple of authors who aren't on Appendix N, but because I don't know why they're not, but they probably should be. Writings of Clark Ashton Smith, specifically like his. He has a couple of different cycles, but like Hyperborea, I think is quite strong. And then
that one I've heard of, I think.
Yeah, that's it's gonna drive me crazy trying to remember what the other one is. It's not important. There are two. The one that's French themed I liked quite a bit as well.
Sure.
And then Carl Edward Wagner's Cain and Charles Saunders' Imaro, which I don't believe Gary was aware of either of these writers, or if he was, he chose to omit them. I don't know why. I could speculate, but I don't want to speak on that.
Sure.
Which kind of woven together make this like really horrible world that appeals to my sensibilities.
This is the world that you're setting for Swords of Chaos?
Yeah. Swords of Chaos, is kind of riffing on all of these different series and kind of imagining a game where you could, at different levels in your career, could be. Oh, and of course, Fritz Lieber's Fafnir and the Grey Mouser, lest we forget. Kind of riffing on at which stage in your career you are, or what level you are, kind of what types of adventures you're on. If you hit 10th level, you could be doing the Elric multiverse, battling the Court of Chaos kind of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're, first or second level, you're slumming it in the city of Lankmar, city of thieves, with Fafnir and the Grey Mouser, knocking over the Thieves Guild because it's fun.
Yeah.
And then mid-high level is, or mid-level is Conan, and then mid-high level is Cain, where it starts to get really weird and dark, because the outside forces are starting to encroach more readily.
Sure.
But that's all my stuff. We're here to talk about Castles and
your
Crusaders.
stuff. No,
Well, no,
I think it's super interesting. Like, is there something? I mean, if you're cool to talk about it, like, is there something about Swords and Chaos, like, just at the heart of it, like, how to even word this question? Like, this might be the weirdest question ever. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if this is even gonna make sense. Is there like a thesis to Swords and Chaos?
Ooh. Yes. Um. I. Ooh. Yes. But I don't know if I should share it
That's okay.
because it might get me in trouble. No, it
With
won't get me in trouble.
who?
I don't know. Um. If I so if the thesis is probably most broadly that extremes are bad.
Mm.
Um, because the game presents lots of conflicts on a spectrum.
Mm.
The most obvious is the conflict between law and chaos. Law wants total uniformity and stagnation. If law had total victory over the universe,
Mm.
life would cease to exist because all matter would become stagnant. Everything would become like a gray waste. And if chaos won, everything would be collapsing and reforming into new things constantly every second. So nothing would last.
Mm.
And so both extremes are extremely bad. Yet we'll align with both extremes.
Yeah.
And we could only survive somewhere in the middle. Another one is this is a very old school or kind of antiquated spectrum, but it's one that I felt I needed to represent given the genre and subject matter of the game, which is barbarism and civilization.
Mm.
Because it's a game about barbarians and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And on one end, you've got total primal savagery like animals, and then you've got barbarism, then you've got civilization, and then you've got ultra civilization. And ultra civilization is what ruined the world. It's what caused the dark moon to fall from the sky and created a plague of sorcery that spawned all the mutants that are running around.
Sure.
It's what brought the forces of chaos back to the world, and it's what ruined everything.
Mm.
But savagery is just as destructive. So somewhere in between barbarism and civilization, I lean a little bit more towards barbarism. Is kind of where, okay, I think we can survive, and there's
Right.
that, extremes is bad is kind of the theme throughout the game. There's a lot of different
Yeah.
axes of that.
I think that's so interesting. Like, so in our setting, Terminus, law, like the god of law, the concept law, was a villain for a short time that initiated like the first like major catastrophe of the
Right.
setting. And just like I don't know if this has increased or not. I think I haven't been like really paying attention to people's thoughts on it consciously until now, but like I think people are interested in law going too far and carrying that thought forward and seeing how it would play out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's
Right.
increased or not.
It like
But
at your table or just in
in
the
general,
zeitgeist? Yeah.
maybe
Yes.
capital S society, maybe, I don't know.
I would agree. That is certainly a story worth exploring and
Yeah.
in the zeitgeist, I'd say,
For sure.
at the very least.
Yeah. How old is Swords and Chaos?
It's coming up on 3 years. I mean, like since it was published or since
Since you
inception?
designed it?
Since the beginning?
Yeah.
probably 3 years. Been
That's
out for about a
awesome.
year now, a little over a year, I think. Yeah.
Sure. That's awesome. How did it feel to like design a game?
Uh, um, there are peaks and valleys and everything.
Sure.
Um, there were times where I was like, "This is stupid. Why am I doing this?" Um, there were even peaks and valleys in getting it. Like
Yeah.
when I got it in my hands, I was like, "Oh my God, it's real!" And I opened it,
Sure.
and the very first page there's a really egregious typo. I was like,
Oh
"No."
no.
Um, so
If it makes you feel better, I think in my book, I think my name is misspelled on the
oh,
inner,
that's
like,
that's really bad.
my last name.
That's
I
really
think that's
bad.
true. I have to double check. Something
Oh
about it is
man.
wrong. But sometimes things just slip through.
Yeah. Well, and writing that book saw me through so much because I was writing it through the
Yeah.
pandemic. It saw me through. I started it at a job that I lost because of the pandemic.
Mm.
And then that was where I started it. And then I was working at another job that I was miserable at, but I was making good money at the time. And all the while in the background, I was just working on this project. And that's, how I
Yeah.
was able to, because I was making this money at this other job. It was actually manufacturing vaccines.
Oh,
Um, I was able to afford all this art and all of these production costs
sure.
that I was incurring. And then the company lost the contract for the vaccine, and so I got laid off from that job too.
Oof.
Um, while I was working on the book, I was like, God.
That sucks.
Yeah. So I got it out though, and there were a lot of times where I wanted to quit.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're thinking about writing a game, this is for anybody who's thinking about writing a game.
Yeah.
Um, don't do it. Don't do it unless you have failed at every other possible avenue in making your life work. All other roads have been barren. All other avenues of your life have fallen and failed, and you are on your last desperate leg. Only then would I say, okay, go ahead, give it a try.
As far, do you
Because
mean in general or with the purpose of like making your living?
oh yeah, with the purpose of making your living.
Okay.
Um, yeah, if you just want to put something out, go ahead. Like,
Sure.
eh, no matter what it is, though, whatever you imagine the work is going to be, you're underestimating it.
Mm.
It's going to be a ton of work, and it will not be fun most of the time.
Yeah.
Especially when you're like filling out paperwork for the state, and you're like, "Why am I doing this?" And then the state rejects your trademark application because something was wrong, and you're $500 down the hole. You're like, I got to do this again. It's going to take how many months?
Yeah.
That's all stuff that'll happen. Um, but no, if you're looking to make this as like a living or something, it's not easy. Uh,
Who knew, right? Like making
yeah.
games and like stuff for people to like facilitate other people's fun.
Oh yeah.
It's
You don't get any time to game, by the way. You get none.
right.
And it kind of ruins the magic for you. Because like now I can't just play a game anymore. I'm like noting like
Mm.
problems with it while I'm playing. Oh my God.
That was something that I encountered with like video games
Yeah.
after I started like doing some like editing jobs.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't watch a movie or play a video game
Oh yeah.
without analyzing the story.
Hmm.
I don't know. Is like for me it's fun. I enjoy like the analysis and like picking stuff apart and then like challenging myself to still enjoy it. But I can totally see how
Uh, don't get it twisted. This stuff is fun to me. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun.
right.
Um, and I love picking stuff apart. My problem is I love it a little too much,
Sure.
and I kind of lose the forest for the trees, and then I don't actually enjoy whatever I'm supposed to be absorbing, and I just kind of like sometimes I just kind of make fun of it the whole time.
Sure,
Which is why
sure. It's kind of fun.
Generally a very bad judge of other people's systems because I can't, you know, I can't turn that part of my brain off.
Sure, sure. But if someone needs their system fucking annihilated.
Yeah, and I mean, I do it to my own system all the time.
Yeah.
My game is a fucking putrid mess.
Please. Hearing you describe it, it sounds fun. It sounds awesome.
There's a lot I would change about it. I better the idea behind it because I wrote
Basic
it, but
stuff,
you know, there's a lot I would change if I did it again, which I may wind up doing. I don't know.
You could do second printing, second edition.
It would have to be a new edition because it would be a radical change. Because I put a bunch of like 5th edition stuff in there that I was like, oh yes, this is much better, and now I'm like so embittered on all of that.
Yeah.
I'm like I want to get it out. And it slowed down the game is what I realized. So because I expanded the turn options from standard offerings of Castles and Crusades, and what I realized is that it really slowed down the combat a lot. I was like, oh, that's no good.
Sure.
So,
by turn options, you mean like stuff that people can choose to do in combat?
So instead of just having an action, they have an action, and they have it's closer to what 5th edition has with the standard action, the move action, all of that bonus action, free action stuff. I don't get quite to that level, but you know,
sure.
Because in Castles and Crusades, it's you get your action, and technically you can move up to half your speed, but
yeah,
that rarely is factored in. Yeah.
Sure. Is it mainly like just the OGL stuff that you take out, or are there like...
There's a lot of OGL stuff I'd have to take out. I might bump up. I would definitely increase the... I might increase the hit points on monsters because they die really easy, which is frustrating to me. Well, actually, what I would really do is I would up armor class. Because I lowered armor class to try and emulate bounded accuracy, and what it kind of wound up doing was making monsters really... It made everyone really easy to hit, which made combat really deadly, which I liked.
Right.
But it means that if you have a team of 4 people that all attack once, against a monster that only attacks once, the monster loses almost every time.
Yeah. In
one-on-one fights, it's way, way more deadly, which is what I was testing it with. And it's way more of a coin toss who's going to win, which I liked.
Yeah.
But if they're using any kind of tactics, they kind of stomp the monster. So I would have to up those ACs back to what they are in Castles and Crusades.
Sure.
And there's stuff like that I would change.
Cool. When did because it seems like there was a progression from monsters to reading fantasy to writing a game system.
Mm-hmm.
How did you make the jump from reading to writing this stuff? Was there anything in particular that prompted that?
A desperate need for cash. And honestly, writing is the worst way to make money.
I got my royalty payment yesterday. Do you want to know what it was? Just guess. How much? $5.63.
I was going to say $5. I was going to say $5.
That's from a year.
That's okay.
That's just the way.
So I had a really desperate need for cash, and I found out that certain magazines would pay per word, and I was like, "Oh, that's easy." So I wrote a fantasy sword and sorcery story in a weekend, and I submitted it. It got rejected because, of course, it would. But I think they paid 3 cents a word, which is pretty high at the time. It might even still be. It's still pretty high now, unless it's an official publication. Well, that one didn't work, and even though I still had this story sitting around, and so I wrote another one, and then I found out that my college had a writers club, and so I went to that, and I was like, hey, can you guys look at this? I don't know what's wrong with it. And I wound up sticking around, and after I just kept writing after that. And eventually, I sold some stuff, but
Sure.
2 years in the Writers Club, I wound up being the president of the GVSU Writers Club, which was not
Grand Valley State?
Grand Valley State, yeah.
Nice.
Which was not something I was planning to do at all. These are all like writing. These are all like journalism and English majors, and I'm like, I'm getting my degree in allied health science. Like, really? I was like, yeah.
That's the best though. Like, I don't know, having been in a few like organizations and stuff in college and high school, like when someone comes in and they have an answer for like what do you like to do aside from writing, it's like, oh, thank God. Because then you're bringing more to the page,
Right.
so to speak. When did you start like joining TLG for cons? Just like the hardest left pivot ever.
Yeah. Well, in 2014, 16, somewhere in there,
Sure.
I went to Gen Con. That was my first major convention. And I met them there. I didn't know who they were. I had no affiliation with this company whatsoever. But I sought them out specifically because I was looking for a copy of one of the Legendary Adventures books. I just saw that their name was on it, not knowing that those books have been out of print for forever and they couldn't legally sell them. And then that was the first time I met them. But after that, I go to GaryCon every year, and I just kept seeing them there. So I think it was last year or 2 years ago that because I had been doing contract writing, or a contract. I was contracted to do some editing, and I had sold them some adventure modules at the time, so they was kind of floating around the booth and stuff. But it wasn't until this past game hole that I was like actually like a rep that like came out with the company.
Sure.
That was my first con doing that. So, and then it'll be GaryCon this month, and then Gen Con later this year, and whatever else we got planned. So
That's cool.
yeah.
I didn't realize it, but it sounds like we both kind of got on board officially at similar times.
Yeah, very close.
I met them like 2 years ago at
Okay.
GaryCon.
Yeah,
Have,
it was around that time.
Were you like writing for other companies as well, or was it mainly like Troller Games?
No one else would take my stuff. No, I hadn't. I had applied to do some editing for Goodman Games, and
Sure.
I had gotten really far in the process, and they were like, "Hey, you're clearly a very experienced editor, but it's clear you don't know our game." I was like, "I played your game like 20 times."
Come on.
I don't know. I don't know what happened there. I must have edited something incorrectly, but
Sure. It happens.
it's just TLG and Goodman. Anything bigger than that, I think anything smaller than that would not have had a budget to bring me on. Anything bigger than that
Sure.
would not look at my very, very limited resume realistically. And
It's so tricky to
yeah.
get in anywhere, really.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I had in the past applied to Wizards of the Coast, and I'm very, 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 very glad I did not get very far in those application
Sure.
processes.
Volatile.
I will not elaborate on that. Thank you.
No further comment, Your Honor.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it feels like it's the type of space, like the professional like community in tabletop RPGs. Everyone wants everyone in the space, but like no one has really the means to like hire everyone that they want to.
Oh no, yeah, because the margins are so razor thin.
Yeah, you have to be really like, I don't know, either the perfect fit or have the right introduction, or like the best and worst advice I ever got was like, get lucky.
Yeah, that's
as
what
a
it
writer?
is. That's what it is. Of course, the self-publishing boom in writing, especially for like outside of RPGs, just writing in general, has been both a blessing and a curse, I think,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
because it makes it so easy to just be like, here's my thing, it's on Amazon.
Right.
Um, and people, if the right people on TikTok pick it up and it gets into circulation, you could be a success overnight.
Yeah.
Um, However, that also means, and you know this, I'm preaching to the choir here. So forgive me for that. I
No,
guess I'm
you're
just doing
good.
this more for the video.
It's just fun to talk
Um,
about.
yeah, the amount of competition is so much higher. There's
Yeah.
so everybody's writing, which is good.
Oh yeah.
But it makes it a lot harder to,
It's good and
stand out in the
bad.
field. Yeah.
It's like I want to work with you, but we're competing, and I don't want to. But
I want
fuck
you to
you.
succeed, but I want you to succeed, but maybe after I have already succeeded. Could you do that?
Not at my
No.
expense, please.
Yeah, exactly. Could you write for an audience completely different than mine? That would be great.
Yeah, just like go do something totally different, maybe,
Yeah.
instead of the thing that I'm also doing. But I mean, it seems like still though, like at the core, at least everyone's so welcoming in spite of like the difficulties of actually getting in and doing stuff professionally.
Yes.
It's still great that everyone's kind.
Which is very fascinating given how financially incentivized they all are to not be.
Oh yeah. It would be so easy to just be totally cutthroat and like
Mm.
I don't know, that first Gary Con
I'm sure some of those people are, but
sure, there's always gonna be like bad apples. My first Gary Con I attended with someone that was basically a stranger and just said yes to going on a whim, and like my first foray into tabletop RPGs like into the player community was horrendous and awful. And so I didn't know if it was going to be like the same thing, but like
Yeah.
it couldn't have been better. Everyone was so welcoming and
Mhm. Well, Gary Con is very special for that. Have you been to Gen Con?
never.
That's very different.
Is it?
It's very everybody. That's like going to a big city. It's like going to New York,
I see.
where everybody's like, I have my thing that I need to do. Get out of my way.
Yeah.
If you get into a conversation with someone, they're usually very friendly, but it's so big and there's so many people. It's
Yeah.
just a lot of traffic mostly. So the vibe is very different. So
Yeah. Have you been to many of those before? Gen Cons?
I've been to one, and I was like,
Okay.
this is such a nightmare. I am never going again. Now I have to do it for work. So
Yippee.
yippee! No, I look forward to it.
I
Apparently,
think
the
it
one I
will be
went
fun.
to, yeah, apparently the one I went to was like a transition year from one organization team to another, and they had a lot going on that was not to their advantage. So I'm hoping
Sure.
this one will be better than my prior experience. I also I didn't know anything about cons at the time, so I didn't sign up for anything. So I was just like wandering around the whole time. I was like,
Yeah.
it's less than ideal.
But you learn and you do.
Sure.
That's about all the time we got for right now.
Okay.
Any last thoughts?
No, I think that covers it.
Sick. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate
Thank you.
it. This was
Okay.
super fun.